Happy New Year. Welcome back to Junction Reads for 2023. I'm so excited that Paul Sunga is going to join us today to talk about his latest novel. It really and truly was such an incredible read. I'm excited to talk about it. But before we introduce Paul and get into today's event, I'd like to acknowledge the land on which Kaylee and I are joining you. Junction Reads exists in Toronto, which for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Wendat, Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. It is still home to many Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on their territory. Paul Sunga joins us from Vancouver, which sits on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. Paul, welcome to Junction Reads.
Thank you so much, Allison. I'm happy to be here.
As I said, I am thrilled to talk to you about Because of Nothing at All from Goose Lane. They're a favorite publisher, and it was no surprise that this book was as incredible as it is. But before we dive into talking about you and your writing and this novel, I'd love to hear what you're reading right now so that some of our audience can steal book ideas.
Yeah, well, when you mentioned that you would like me to talk about some of my readings, I looked around at what I actually was reading, and some of it is a bit confusing, even to me, as to why I might be reading it. So I'll start with probably the most peculiar, is called Law and Morality, Readings in Legal Philosophy. So the reason I'm reading this is because I found this book in a family member's academic bookshelf, and it is something that has some great readings in it. It's a textbook, but this is a huge area of interest to me, actually. Then on the fiction side, I'm reading The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich. She's a longtime favorite of mine. I just recently finished Paradise by Abdul Razak Gurnah, which he's, of course, an East African writer and Nobel Prize winner now. Writes, it's very intriguing for me to read his writing about the same region that I'm writing in this book. And I just finished The Passenger by Cormac McCarthy.
Wow, yeah.
I love some of McCarthy's writing, although I can't speak really highly about this particular book.
Oh, really?
Frank, he's contributed so much to literature, and this might have been a bit more of a struggle for him. With some very vague, overarching ideas that I respect that too. But yeah.
Well, Cormac McCarthy is a journey anyway, an emotional journey to read for me. That's my opinion. I'm sure a lot of people consume his books without having the same emotional impact.
Oh yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Yeah. The characters really, more than anything, and how dark they can think.
Yeah,
I think
darkness, true.
Yeah. Well, I am really thrilled that this book exists for you. I'm excited that there are two people here today who might actually win a copy of it from Goose Lane. But before we hear you read, would you mind if I shared a biography?
Of course not.
Okay. Paul Sunga is the author of 3 novels. His first 2 novels are The Lions from Orca Books and Red Dust, Red Sky from Coteau Books. Because of Nothing at All was published from Goose Lane in 2022, and it is his 3rd novel and was written during a period of international health consultancy in East Africa. Inspired by his work, Paul's fiction shares the struggles that exist for many people around the world. Sunga's nonfiction works include medical science articles, and reports and books in international health and medical science. He has been a consultant for the Government of Canada and the IDRC and has worked in more than a dozen countries in Africa and Asia over the last 20 years. Paul Sunga is a professor at Langara College in Vancouver, where he lives. There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
I am thrilled to hear you read. As you mentioned to us before the event got started, you're going to start from the beginning of the book.
Yeah, so if you're ready for that, whenever I'm asked to read in public, I always go through and find all the different passages and then ultimately end up reading from the beginning because I don't know, it makes most logical sense, I suppose. So here it is. Chapter 1, Money Manu, Dandora, Kenya, 1991-1995. When Money Manu held himself to account, as all must eventually do, he thought of the reasons for his choices. There were many reasons that went far and deep to his beginnings. Ultimately, he considered himself to be an economic agent, not a terrorist and not a killer. It was because of profit, the invisible hand, because of supply and demand, because of how he started, because of how he went, because of the accounting that must be done, because he was a sufferer who saw opportunity, because in the end there was no opportunity, because of what he did not know, because of 1,000 now and 9 later, and possibly much more, because the way he started was in the Manu Healthy Child Center, where they dispensed ugali, porridge so stiff it stuck in the throat. So he decided no. This meant hungry while the others ate. They took his bowl to share among themselves while Matron looked on with her grand jaggy swinging over them, saying he might starve or live, it mattered not. She had 62 others to see about, and every one of them had to decide to live or not. That was the way of the Lord. And just as your name is money, you can go one way or the other, up or down, wealthy or poor, asset or debt. He chose not to eat, if only to show Matron that his mind was independent. It was the first choice he could remember making. Because no matter which way he turned, there were other kids, all of them the same. He might pelt his feet down and travel far and fast, hide himself, leap bravely into the waters of the Nairobi River and wade, and still, there on the other side, more kids, shoving, falling, hurting, yelling, sinking, yanking at his trousers to laugh at his broken Indiki. 47, 57, 68 changing faces, changing names. The babies unnamed until the director decided to label them in hopeful and practical ways that only he could think of. Names meant to guide them to good destinies. Cute, timely, wailing, beautiful, slightly lucky, very lucky, fortunate, persistence, jurisprudence, truth, righteous, struggle and freedom, mercy and equity, contract and commodity, inflation, royalty and profit, gold, shilling, sterling and euro. When the director was in a less visionary frame of mind, he named them solicitor, engineer, medical, prestige, influence, power, capital, barrister, doctor, accountant, banker, money. Baby Power had liquid, blind eyes that put Matron into a trance so that she carried him about on her hip, then slept with him nestled into her soft jugs. But Baby Powder vanished in the dark of one night, and that was the end of Matron. She searched for Baby Power and was Wizumu and had madness. One evening, the director found her crawling on the floor, overtaken by the spirit of lost and blind Baby Power. After Matron went away, gone to Baby Power. Some days later, an older girl named Mercy casually asked the director the whereabouts of Matron and Baby Power. He answered with a smooth smile. Ah, by the way, they were sent back. Sent back where, Bona? Ah, by the way, to their people. They were sent back to their people. Others were sent back to their people, to places far away, no one ever saw them again. To places so far away, no one ever saw them again. One by one and two by two, brothers and sisters came and were sent back. Kids with narrow chests and coughs and thin legs, with their lost eyes. Sufferers, some with ribs jutting, malarious, their guts infested. They wanted to stay. They would try to be normal, chase the rag football with the others, never running well, never touching the ball because of cramps, tired, diarrhea shit, vomiting, sick, always sick. Some stayed for a time only to be sent back later. Others faded gradually, overrun by fevers, their skin gone yellow, angry red, cold, infected, spat blood, too bad. Others shat so much they went from narrow to empty, or starved, shat, choked, then sent back. Brain, fever, malaria, typhoid, slim disease, sorcery, medicine, the poisonous spells of the Mungiki fevers. Because of those who were sent back, because of his brothers and sisters, a person needed to fight for wellness, commodities, profit. They fail, Director Buon explained with a broad smile, in order to mock the wealth of opportunity. You have to tell me when you've had enough of this, or I can just stop spontaneously, Allison.
You can stop whenever you like. I'm happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go a little bit further.
Okay.
Chicky comes down the lane, heavy in the belly, her baby ready to pop out of her thing. She comes along slowly, climbs the stairs, sinks down with the baby half out, the baby trying to be born right there. No one knows this Chicky with her spindly legs. She is not from here, but her baby fights like a rat, stuck, gasping at the sour air. The kids watch quietly, knowing that the baby is them, and that the mother is their own mother, a mother no one knows, this young mama who wails for someone to help because the baby is stuck. A girl named Purity comes, sticks her hand in, gets hold of the baby, but it's slippery with blood and mess, so that Purity lets go and runs away, wailing to Buona D. With hands bloody, Buona comes out and shoos the children away. Later, that mother is gone, sent home to her people. But the baby gets a name because what else is there to do? And the baby stays for a time, infected, HIV, howling through the dark nights like a cat on fire, mad for its bad luck. Others come at night to the Healthy Child Center, sniffing, troubled, quiet of words or explanations. Girls with footballs already in their bellies, who give birth here and there, stay for days, weeks, then gone, their footballs left squalling behind, so that the new mothers can be sent back to start their lives again, or sent home to their families, back to their places. Because of babies, so many babies left behind the walls, in the ditches, in the river, in waste bins, in the latrines. If they were lucky, director and matron brought them in, collected them in bags, babies and rubbish, babies jettisoned, only to be collected before they sank, and others who washed up, unsinkable, blinking and choking away the muck of the Nairobi River. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. A couple of sections later is probably one of my most favorite sensory passages, when you introduce the new matron who comes with these shoes that squeak Y O Y O Y O Y O Y. I just thought that was spectacular. But I have so many questions. I want to talk to you about your experiences, but let's start, because we started with money's chapter. Let's talk about money. The novel is sectioned off into these chapters that are titled in relation to money, in the imperatives of money, the market, costs and benefits. And of course, one of the main characters' names is money. How did you know, or was it one of this kind of starting ideas to the novel? How did you know that money was going to be titled in sections, and that this character was going to have money as a name?
When I was writing this and I came up with the idea of naming that character, money. I mean, there's two reasons for it. One was that I knew people, I was associated with people over the years that I worked with, names like that, and it always got me. Um, how I mean, one of the things that's really interesting to me is how people in former colonies use the English language differently, and even in naming. So, I mean, there's all kinds of names out of the Bible and out of, in this case, economics that, appear in people's names, and it seems comical if you don't know better when you meet people and someone's name is Glorious or Hero or, Dollar or something, But in this case, there was always a risk of bonking people over the head with the ideas that I was working with here, which are framed out in the sections of the book as if it's an economic treatise. Things about markets and supply and demand and those kind of things. And you could hear in the text that I even wrote from the beginning that some of those ideas are in the background there. This is what I wanted to write about. I mean, I started writing the story after some experiences in that region of the world. And a lot of these experiences are not necessarily in the book, but they prompted me to start writing this story. And as I was writing it, the idea of writing about economic disparity and economic circumstances and how they affect people's individual choices and play into some of these really difficult to understand events that take place in the world, like terrorist events or in this case, abductions, or murders or anything like that. I mean, we're always horrified by these events, and everybody asks the same question. I mean, how do these things take place? I mean, who are these people who are doing these things, and what are the things that drive them to do it? I think they're questions everybody has, but for me, I started using the story as a vehicle to talk about that. I mean, I as a person working in public health, international health, it becomes very concerning about these kind of disparities, because in public health, of course, you're concerned with the disparities of health, or you're statistically minded of health indicators. But of course, health indicators are about people's lives. I mean, and you see it when you're on the ground in poor countries. You see how unfair people's circumstances are with respect to their health. And that, so even if you just take it from a public health point of view, without the humanity, just as a public health scientist, you would say, well, this is a fundamental problem. We should be addressing this problem more than trying to just come up with vaccines or something.
Right.
I was working, by the way, almost all the instances that I was working overseas were with the Canadian government, with CETA, which was, now it's Global Affairs Canada, but CETA is the Canadian International Development Agency. And it was a quasi-independent organization working on development aid. So that was an enormous opportunity for me. I mean, I'd lived in Africa, I traveled, but working as a consultant in public health, for me, I learned an enormous amount about these overarching issues that are about world economics, globalization, and these trends that everybody's grappling with every day now.
Yeah. And it's interesting because one of your characters, and you spoke to just in the beginning of what you were talking about, the idea that people don't know, the depth of the crisis or the severity of the crisis. And at one point, David Mason Tremblay, who's one of the characters who gets abducted, says that he's speaking specifically about refugees and the refugee crisis. And he says it's too immense in scale, too abstract to touch him. And that made me think about what you just said, which is we don't know until people like you write a book like this and give us, that intimate experience, or, we read personal essays or other nonfiction pieces from people we don't know. And so the corruption, the greed, everything that's happening in relation to the public health crisis and the refugee crisis is, as your character says, abstraction.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I find fascinating, and the reason I'm a novelist, is because a novel is an opportunity to delve deeply into people's characters and experiences in a different way than anything else. I mean, working in public health, you're working at this very macro level, and if you're an economist working in on global issues, it's even more macro. You're sitting in Ottawa or Washington D.C. or wherever, London or whatever, and dealing with big ideas that affect millions of people, but it's very hard to connect with an individual experience. I mean, I just have one little anecdote to tell you. I'm not going to go too far off on this, but when I began working in international development in the 90s, I was working in East Africa and Tanzania, and at that time they had a structural adjustment program in place that was imposed by the IMF. The economy was on the rocks, and in order to pull out of it, they had to agree to conditions in order to have money to tide them over economically. I'm simplifying. If anybody out there knows a lot about economics, and they might sort of laugh at the way I'm describing it, but essentially, the structural adjustment plan that they imposed was that the government had to withdraw from public services. They couldn't, they basically said, well, you can't afford public services, and not only that, but we want you to, of course, being the IMF, they wanted to impose much more market-oriented economics in the country. And Tanzania had this history of African socialism that it just was still there. So what we found working in public health is when we went to communities, I was called there and started a project that was we were trying to deal with the cholera epidemic at that time. We walked in there and to this big community, Mwanza, which is on the shore of Lake Victoria, and people were dying on the way to the hospital of cholera. They were dying of diarrhea and dehydration. It was terrifying. And we were, brought in to see if we could implement a program with the communities about this. But the first thing I saw was there was a piped water system in the community that had been abandoned. And I said, well, why are we trying to do all this, work with getting water supply and clean water when there's actually a system here that hasn't been maintained? And they said, well, this was part of the structural adjustment program, or the way it was manifested, is that they didn't put money into their water system. Basically, that part of their budgeting was bereft after the structural adjustment program. And now people were dying in the street. I mean, people were dying on the way to the hospital.
Yeah.
But I couldn't help reflect on the fact that somebody sitting in an office in Washington, D.C., across from the State Department, had insisted ideologically on this market economics, having no idea of what it actually ended up meaning to communities.
Right.
So this disconnect between the macro and the actual situation on the ground is well, it's difficult challenge, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And one of the things about the arts in general and literature is that you have an opportunity to connect with people about human experience in a different way. And it's not scientific. I mean, I was trained as a scientist, but this is kind of a satisfying other end of the spectrum way
Yeah.
of exploring ideas. And I also think it's got so much potential if it's done properly. I mean, if people can connect with it.
Yeah. Well, this one of the and I mentioned this to you earlier, one of the most, I think, moving, I mean, probably not the most, but what you did so well was create these multidimensional characters, as I mentioned to you, who are all, despite how villainous their actions or how indifferent they seem to be, are all in some way so human. And I'm just going to just sort of break it down for a few people. The three people who get abducted are Avi Kestner, David Mason Tremblay, and Mirette Gabriel. And then Money and his maybe friend Hassan are the abductees who are reporting to someone else who is reporting to someone else. Their driver, Salim Muhammad, has another completely separate life that exists in the novel. And then probably the most villainous character, Sebastian, also known as Ali Sudani at the end. Even he himself doesn't come across as a pure villain because he's so complicated. I felt like that, as fictional or maybe non-fictional as these characters were, I felt like that they really and truly were the heart of the story, because there's this constant battle between morality and power and greed, and we don't want to invest all this money because what are we going to get back? Like, there's just all this conflict in public health, international public health, that you mirror so well in all of these characters. I'm hoping that you'll talk about them and how each of them was maybe born and brought into the story.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate your comment so much, and I'm also just gratified to know that you got that, because I think all of us experience this in life, is that people are full of contradictions, and they're paradoxical, they're complicated. Even people who might ostensibly be, illiterate, semi-literate, very poor. I think one of the things that you experience for anybody who moves about in resource poor environments around the world, to use that term, it's the international development term, poor places,
Yeah.
There's a lot of sort of people who are like the little people who come and go, and when you're traveling about as a Canadian health consultant in the government of Canada, the brand new 4x4 and all that stuff. There's all these little functionaries, they're all little people, like the drivers and the guy who cleans the room and the woman who, serves you tea and all the different things. And, one thing that always struck me was that people in some countries, in a lot of countries like this, where there's really desperate circumstances and desperate poverty, are way more aware of global trends and economic trends than I think a lot of people in Canada are.
Yeah.
And this always struck me. Like, even I always had so many interesting drivers who would, they knew all about, they had a better grip on American politics than most Americans.
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody, but so many of them.
Yeah.
And then you'd find out, if you dug a little deeper, you found out, well, this person has a degree in political science, actually, or most of it from, some university, some you've never heard of, or that they are just a person who, really keeps up with stuff. And it's not that, I mean, people have to, because it affects them so much. But anyways, I don't like overblow this point, actually, but I think I already have. But really, the thing about it is that it's surprising how complex people are
Mhm.
You know, and it seems like a bland point. It's surprising how complex people are in these other circumstances that and the other part of it is, of course, that sometimes they seem to be trapped into circumstances that they have to take certain actions that lead them down dark pathways.
Mhm.
Um, and that's something you know, if you're working in a place and working with governments, working with communities, uh, I've started to see it quite a bit, that desperate circumstances lead to desperate measures, of course, but some of
Mhm.
those desperate circumstances are about just trying to negotiate globalization. Like,
Yeah.
what has this global economics meant to me as some little person living in Pakistan?
Mhm.
Um, because you know, for a lot of these populations, you know, when we talk about globalization, what it ended up being was that capital could move freely everywhere. So the structural adjustment plan in Tanzania meant they wanted capital to be able to move freely
Yeah.
and have free access to the market. But people, especially from those places, are not free to move.
Right.
They're stuck. And, you know, if you're, I don't know, I'm a naive economist in a way, but I think, oh, well, there's capital, but there's labor. And of course, the whole issue of the labor and people in impoverished circumstances trying to improve their economic life plays right into the massive issue that's every day played out in the news about people trying to migrate into other places, because perhaps they mistakenly think that globalization means that I can move to where there's good opportunities, just like
Right.
capital can move into my country and have its good opportunities to make profit for somebody back in wherever.
Mhm.
You know,
It's not that easy.
it's not that easy. People get trapped in these circumstances, right? And I think the other part of it that I tried to portray in the book was that with information technology, now everybody can see everything that's going on.
Mhm.
You know, it used to be, I mean, 25 even years ago, you'd be in a place and people, you know, unless they were reading the newspapers and everything all the time, it was pretty hard for them to see the extent of, it was very hard for people to, for example, get the idea what lifestyles were like in, say, Vancouver.
Mhm.
You know, it would be like this opaque, you know, and they would have some strange ideas about it, maybe, but nowadays everybody can see everything.
Yeah.
You can see what people live like in Vancouver. And
Mhm.
if you're sitting in Mwanza or in um, um, Nairobi or somewhere, I mean, you can see what the
Yeah.
difference is between their lives and other people's lives in these rich places.
Yeah. And that's I think you mentioned the driver and that conflict and information technology or enlightenment maybe is part of the contradiction in Salim, right? For example, the driver in the story. He talks about religion and he's got, a degree where he learned enlightenment. Essentially, he says he should be an atheist, right? With everything that he's learned, except he is still doing his daily um um uh
Oh,
supplications to Allah,
yeah.
right? Like
Mhm.
instead of um the mess of intersubjectivity that religion and religious ideologies are. And I loved that because again, it's like you say, how how did Salim get stuck here? How did he get trapped by money or enticed by money with money? And how is he not somewhere else? That was my first question when Salim started talking about just the opportunity to be educated. I thought, oh man, why is he here? And I think
Mhm.
that's it exactly, that he's trapped there somehow.
Yeah, and opportunities for people who are graduates or professionals are different in poor countries. Most people know that. But
Mhm.
the other, so you have people with, you know, like a degree in literature. not necessarily going to, be
Right.
in literature, is not going to sort of necessarily put him into a top flight position somewhere in Kenya but yeah, people end up into, into sort of some kind of channel or pathway. Sometimes years go by and you have something like gambling debts that this happens everywhere, but these kind of things throw people into loops, through their life plan or whatever, if they had a plan. But yeah, I was going to say something else. I've just totally slipped my mind.
Even Avi's trapped, like as a character. Towards the end, when he's having conversations with his daughter and another daughter that doesn't talk to him because he himself somehow got trapped in this loop of one project after another because he's
So
avoiding life. Or
So one of the overarching ideas in back of the story, without without the risk of making things too obvious, but there uh, there has been this, what I often think of as an economization of culture. In other words, that I think over the last, you could argue about when this really took off, Second World War, or has it been the last 150 years? But anyways, that making money for yourself and, being an economic agent of some sort, low level or higher level economic agent, has become central to world culture.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I find compelling about people is, you see it played out in Canada, of course, and we're this, multicultural place, but in a lot of the people that come here are from very traditional backgrounds. It could be Islamic, or it could be Christian, or it could be Hindus, or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but a powerful religion like Islam, uh, it people are, their lifestyle is so imbued with religion. Large parts of the population in some parts of the world, like I worked in areas that are very conservative Muslim places. And once again, you have these paradoxes, you have these different influences on people. You have this, underlying moral doctrine that's in the Quran and laid out quite clearly and everything. And it speaks to very high ideals, in fact. I think I sometimes fear that a lot of Westerners don't really appreciate how good those ideals are in the Quran, actually. But they're not, as we know, people interpret religion doctrine in different ways. But that, these things may be in contradiction with this economic culture that we live in, these economic influences that dominate the internet, for example.
Mhm.
If you look at the mainstream internet, I would say, I'm just going out on a limb here, but so much of what happens is commercial, about money. Literally about money, and about somebody making, I don't know, you see every once in a while these ads of somebody else, I make, $400,000 a week doing some
Yeah.
dumb thing on the internet. I don't know what it is, but these things are influence everyone or everywhere, because everyone can access it.
Mhm.
It's part of it, but it goes much deeper than that. This whole idea of how central, acquisition and consumer ethics, if you can call it ethics, but it's
Mhm.
consumerist ethics, has run up against traditional cultures and religious ideas. And when you talk to people, you see this happening, and these ideas are at odds with each other.
Yeah.
Salim's a gambler. He gets into gambling. It's completely haram. but he's doing it because he went to university, he was with a bunch of people, and ends up gambling as a habit, and he's he gets in debt and he wants to get out of it, and that's what is part of his motivation. It's very human, but at the other hand, he's got these conflicting underlying forces. Everyone does.
Mhm. I didn't I didn't appreciate the gambling debt. I don't think. I think I read it and then it kind of left me when I was starting to think more deeply about his intellectual conflicts. But Mirette Gabriel is such a great character. I sort of felt like we didn't see enough of her, but she kind of speaks to the two sides of the refugee crisis, because she's got a family farm, they've got land, they've got all of this property, and at some point she decides to open up her family's land and allow refugees to come and stay and eat and feed off the land. Where was the inspiration for her character? And yeah, I think I sort of felt she was probably the one character who I felt like I didn't really get to know well enough in the novel, but still was at the end of it the most memorable character because of her actions and her strength and a lot of other stuff that she does in the novel.
You don't know how many people have told me that exact same thing.
Oh, I'm
Including my
redundant.
publisher. It's like, well, how come we didn't know about this character? And I don't know, maybe it's just coincidence, but they're all women. Every single one of the people have said
Right,
that.
right.
Okay.
Well, for me, it was the just the fact that she opened up the family farm, but also the conversations with the people about that speaks to what you also mentioned earlier with, what is this going to do? It, like, her family, if we do this, what is it going to do in the end? It's not going to make a big
to be very serious about it,
Yeah.
aside from joking about women wanting more of this female character, the character is this woman full of grace and honor and strength, and I didn't sort of set out to write a heroic female character or something like that, but
Mhm.
in truth, it's not a coincidence that I would have written that about a woman from Ethiopia and from the countryside, because not like she could have been from one of the other countries I've worked in East Africa, because I've met so many women who were quietly kind of leading the way in their communities and their villages. In fact, my project that I led and co-designed with my African counterparts in Tanzania, the one that I mentioned that started with the cholera epidemic, because that went on for 10 years, funded by Canada, was designed to work with women leaders, in all these places. And the reason was because the women were the ones that wanted to step up and do something about their local public health.
Yeah.
And they wanted to get this training and learn how to deal with it and all that stuff, which is what we did. And I met all kinds of characters that had strains of that ended up in this particular character. She's not modeled after any particular person. She
Mhm.
just, all the characters in my books, actually, in this book, were not modeled after a particular individual, but were developed during the course of the writing,
Yeah.
based on all kinds of experiences and people, of course. I have done it the other way. In my last book, there were characters that actually were models for some of the characters in the book, but not here. But I wrote this over a long enough period of time that I really felt like I was living with these people.
Yeah.
They were real to me. Without sounding a little bit psychotic, but another whole issue. But that they would have actual voices and make their own choices as to what they were doing.
Mhm.
Like that character, of course she was going to do this, and of course she was going to do that, and of course she was going to have the strength to try to do what she did.
Mhm.
That was just completely her. I don't know how I get into this kind of thing, but it's I get woken up in the middle of the night by people talking, whatever.
Yeah,
I want to go further on that. Let's say.
a room full of people.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
will
yeah.
say more than Miret, and speaking of psychosis, maybe this is going to speak to my mental state. I wanted more of Sebastian, and I don't want to talk a lot about him, but for anyone, if you read the novel, you'll understand why I even questioned myself in wanting more of him in the novel. Talk about complex characters. He is absolutely one of the weirdest experiences with a character that I've had, like so villainous, and yet I pitied him in so many ways.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Yeah, so
Very sad, right? Yeah.
yeah, very sad, very, and not pity in a pitiful way, but just so feel free to write a short story with him as a main character, because I will gladly read that.
I could have, the original script of this book
Mhm.
was almost double.
Wow, that's amazing. So
I was, I had one of my
800
biggest
pages.
challenges once I was engaged with the publisher
Yeah,
was bringing it down to the size it was, and even then, they felt it was long.
yeah.
But so I had much more exploration of these different people in the book originally.
Mhm.
I don't know in terms of whether that would have been better or not, but it was just what naturally came out during the evolution of the book was to really explore these back these characters
Yeah,
and their backstories more
yeah.
because of again the circumstances that they were in and the choices that they had to make. I guess for me, I wanted to explore it more. I mean,
Yeah. I think it's hard though, because when I mean, and again, maybe it's because I have complete like read the final product and feel how I feel about the characters. I sometimes worry if you have too much, then at one point in time that conflict, which I feel like is an essential part of the novel, the conflict of the conflicted characters, that if they're drawn out too much, then they're no longer conflicted. They are um more three-dimensional, and you know exactly who they are.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas
I understand
whereas
what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
whereas
an interesting point. Yeah, is it too
how
explicit, right?
yeah, but how it stands now, there's so much that we don't know, so much that we haven't experienced with them, that we're left either hopeful or feeling hopeless for a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was great. I've taken over with my questions. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Kaylee will ask on your behalf. And I will just ask one more question, because I was so talk about sensual experiences in the novel. A couple of characters you mentioned diarrhea, so I'm not gonna feel sorry for saying the word or having a TMI moment, but worms, diarrhea, all of these internal conflicts exist in your characters, and I want to know if that was as symbolic as I read it to be, that kind of rotting from the inside out, or if it was really just the cholera and dirty water and everything that exists in East Africa.
Allison, I'm going to leave that to the reader to decide.
Okay, good. Then I will. I'll keep my I'll keep my feelings about it.
There's the thing about writing. I mean, I think was a fairly complex novel. Is that I mean, from my experience as a writer, there are a lot of things that subconsciously emerge in the writing that are representative or symbolic or whatever you want to say,
Yeah.
that you aren't conscious of it. But of course, when you look at the example you gave about an individual's health and describing it, and the corruption and the contradiction at the root of their health status. I mean, when I hear your question, I mean, it's quite obvious. And when I'm writing something like that, some of those passages, and I know there's lots of them all the way through.
Yeah.
I was not in a state of like trying to find symbols or make statements. It was just that was what was in the story. Was sort of an aspect of the story that sorry, I'm just like there are some latter passages where one of the principal characters, it goes into a sort of altered state of reality. And that place really allowed me to really address a lot of things that were subterranean, of the type you're talking about. I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to be too.
Yeah, I think,
associated
and I'm not going to speak to money's physical
right
characteristics, but there's a moment later on in the novel with a woman and her child, and I think because you talked about female readers versus male readers, I would be curious to talk to a couple of women and a couple of men who read the book and speak to the symbolic gesture, whether conscious or unconscious, for money.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, for money, and who he's ended up becoming as a result of his physical appearance. And no,
you're right. It's a kind of progression.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I could literally sit here and talk to you for days about it, because I want so much to just hear personal details about your own experiences working in international public health. But Kaylee, do we have any questions from anyone else? No questions. That makes me feel good. Right? Does that mean that we did a good job in talking about because of nothing at all? It's good. I am so grateful that you sat down to talk to us today about this novel. I'm really excited for two people to win a copy of it. And I'm going to give you my email address, because after you finish reading it, I want you to send me your impressions about what we talked about in the latter part of this conversation. So we're going to raffle off a copy today in the chat, and then I am going to raffle off a copy either through grabbing names from Twitter shares, people who share the video of this event on Instagram or YouTube or wherever. I'll grab a bunch of names in about a week and a half and raffle off the second copy. But Kaylee, here we go. Who is going to win this? And thank you again from Goose Lane Editions. They've donated another couple of copies of the book for the raffle.
Yes. So our winner today, I'm excited to say, is Christy Lee Wah.
Hey.
Oh, thank you. I did not expect that. That's
Christy,
so awesome.
That's fantastic. You can send me an email to junctionwrites@gmail.com, and I will send your name and mailing address directly off to the publisher. And if you've read it and there's someone else that you would like to give the copy of the book to, you can also give me their name and address, and I'll send that off to Ben, and he can get that copy out to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Paul, Sunga, thank you so much again.
Oh, I enjoyed it. And thank you and everyone who attended this. And thank you, Allison, for your efforts in making this happen. It was interesting for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciated it. We've got another couple of events or another 3 or 4 events this season. And on Thursday, I'm going to sit down and talk to Nicholas Herring about his novel on Instagram Live at 7 p.m. But otherwise, I'm glad that everyone got to join us today. I really appreciate you coming out. And Paul, again, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and best wishes.
And have a great afternoon in Vancouver.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thank you, Kaylee.
Thank you.